Welcome to the quiet of the evening. Welcome once again to the Vespers Ledger. Tonight we open a new volume in our ancient records. We leave behind the marble streets of Rome and the walls of Jerusalem, and we journey into the vast, silent expanse of the ancient wilderness. Settle in, let the worries of the present day fade, and travel with us back over 3,000 years. We are going to the rugged shores of the Red Sea under a sky heavy with mystery and deliverance. The year is lost to the ancient sands, but the memory remains etched in the soul of history. The children of Israel, after 400 years of bitter labor under the harsh sun of Egypt, were finally free. Millions of footsteps echoed across the desert floor, families, flocks, and elders carrying the bones of their ancestor Joseph, walking out of the shadow of the pyramids. They were led not by a map, but by a miracle, a towering pillar of cloud by day to shield them from the scorching desert sun, and a radiant pillar of fire by night to illuminate their path. But freedom is rarely a simple journey. The ancient historian Flavius Josephus paints a vivid picture of their first great trial. Moses, guided by the divine ledger, led the people into a narrow passage near Pi-hahiroth, encamping them directly beside the vast dark waters of the Red Sea. They were hemmed in. Rugged, impassable mountains towered to their sides, and the deep, churning waters lay before them. It was a place of absolute vulnerability. Back in Egypt, the heart of Pharaoh had hardened once more. Realizing he had lost his immense workforce, he summoned the greatest military machine the ancient world had ever seen. 600 chosen chariots, thousands of horsemen, and an endless sea of infantry marched out into the desert. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the desert in hues of purple and blood orange, the Israelites heard the terrifying, rhythmic thundering of hooves and chariot wheels echoing off the canyon walls. They looked back, and there, marching out of the gathering darkness, was the army of Egypt. Panic swept through the camp like a sudden storm. The cries of terrified mothers, the weeping of children, and the angry accusations of the elders filled the evening air. They turned to Moses, their voices thick with despair, asking if there were no graves in Egypt that he had brought them out to die in the wilderness. Matthew Henry, in his timeless commentary, notes that when we are surrounded by difficulties on every side, human nature naturally looks down in fear rather than looking up in faith. But Moses, an old man of 80, stood firm against the wind of their panic. He possessed a peace that surpassed all human understanding. His voice rang out over the terrified multitude, carrying the authority of heaven. "Fear not, stand firm, and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will work for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you shall never see again. The Lord will fight for you, and you have only to be silent." And then the impossible happened. The great pillar of cloud that had been leading them slowly moved from the front of the camp and positioned itself at the rear, placing itself directly between the camp of Israel and the army of Egypt. As the night fell, this majestic pillar transformed. To the Egyptians it became a wall of impenetrable, terrifying darkness, confusing their horses and halting their march. But to the Israelites it became a brilliant, warm pillar of fire, lighting their camp with the glow of divine protection. The same presence of God brought a profound peace to his people and a complete halt to their enemies. In the quiet glow of that holy fire, God told Moses to stretch his hand out over the sea. A strong, unyielding east wind began to blow. It blew all through the night, a relentless, roaring force that did not bring a storm, but a clearing. The deep waters, heavy and ancient, began to part. The sea was divided, and a dry path was formed right through the heart of the ocean. The waters stood like great shimmering walls of glass on their right hand and on their left. In the dead of night, under the awe-inspiring light of the fiery pillar, the children of Israel walked on to the seabed. They walked on dry ground where there should have been only drowning waters. It was a passage from certain death into a new life. By the time the morning watch arrived, the Egyptians realized what had happened and rushed blindly into the sea in pursuit. But the ledger of heaven had already written their end. The chariot wheels bogged down in the mud, panic set in, and when Moses stretched his hand out once more, the great walls of water collapsed. The sea returned to its normal course, washing away the chains of Egypt forever. As you rest tonight, remember the shores of the Red Sea. Perhaps you feel hemmed in by the mountains of anxiety, with the waters of uncertainty before you, and the shadows of the past pursuing you. Remember the words spoken to the weary travelers so long ago. The Lord will fight for you, and you have only to be silent. May the same pillar of fire watch over your rest tonight, bringing warmth to your heart and keeping the darkness at bay. Sleep in peace, knowing that God can make a way where there seems to be no way. Welcome once again to the quiet hours. Settle into the peace of the evening and let the heavy ledger of your own daily worries be gently set aside. Tonight we continue our journey on the ancient paths, walking alongside the children of Israel as they step away from the shores of the Red Sea and move deeper into the unknown. They had witnessed the greatest miracle of their age, the parting of the deep waters. Yet the human heart is fragile, and the memory of a miracle often fades when faced with the harsh reality of tomorrow. The great multitude journeyed into the wilderness of sin, a vast, unforgiving expanse of rock, sand, and scorching heat lying between Elim and Sinai. It was precisely 1 month since they had left the land of Egypt. The supplies of dough and grain they had carried on their shoulders were finally gone. Look around at this ancient landscape. There were no golden fields of wheat to harvest, no bustling markets to buy bread, and no green pastures for their flocks. The ancient historian Flavius Josephus describes this terrain as utterly destitute of everything necessary for life. Fear, cold and sharp, began to creep into the camp. The people looked at their children, they looked at the barren horizon, and they began to murmur against Moses and Aaron. They spoke through the lens of their anxiety, romanticizing the chains they had just escaped. They cried out, saying it would have been better to die by the hand of the Lord in Egypt, where they sat by pots of meat and ate bread to the full, rather than to be brought into this wilderness to die of hunger. Matthew Henry, in his timeless reflections, reminds us that it is the profound folly of human nature to distrust God's providence, even after we have seen his power. But the Almighty did not answer their complaints with anger. He answered their fear with extraordinary grace. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Behold, I am about to rain bread from heaven for you, and the people shall go out and gather a day's portion every day." As evening fell over the rugged canyon walls, casting long, dark shadows across the tents of Israel, a sudden sound filled the air. It was not the sound of a storm, but the beating of countless wings. A massive flock of quails flew into the camp, covering the desert floor, providing fresh meat for the evening. The people ate and were satisfied as the stars slowly appeared in the night sky. But the true mystery, the profound miracle of the desert, was waiting for the dawn. When the morning came, the people stepped out of their tents into the cool, crisp desert air. The heavy morning dew that lay around the camp began to lift, evaporating under the first rays of the sun. And there, left behind on the face of the wilderness, was a fine, flake-like thing, fine as frost on the ground. It was white like coriander seed, shimmering in the morning light. The Israelites stared at it in quiet wonder. They had never seen anything like it. They turned to one another and asked in Hebrew, "Manhu?" which means, "What is it?" Moses answered them with a voice full of peace. "It is the bread that the Lord has given you to eat." This was the manna, the bread of angels. When they gathered it and ground it, it tasted like wafers made with honey. But there was a divine rule attached to this heavenly provision. They were to gather only what they needed for that specific day. Nothing was to be saved for the next morning. God was teaching them the hardest yet most comforting lesson of the wilderness: total, daily dependence on His hand. Those who tried to hoard it out of fear found that it spoiled by the next sunrise. But on the 6th day they were told to gather twice as much, for the 7th day was the Sabbath, a day of holy rest. And miraculously the bread kept for the Sabbath remained perfectly pure and sweet. For 40 years, through the endless, shifting sands of the desert, this silent miracle occurred every single morning. Before the heat of the sun could melt it away, God provided exactly what His people needed for the day. No more and no less. As we close the ledger for tonight, perhaps you find yourself in your own wilderness. Perhaps you are looking at the horizon, wondering how you will face the challenges of tomorrow or how your needs will be met. Let the quiet miracle of the manna bring rest to your soul tonight. You do not need the strength for tomorrow yet. You only need to trust that the same hand that provided for the wanderers in the ancient desert is the hand that holds you now. Let go of tomorrow's worries. Rest in the provision of today. Sleep deeply, and may the peace of God, which falls as gently as the morning dew, be upon you tonight. Welcome back to the sanctuary of the evening. The day is done, the world has quieted its restless turning, and here, in the pages of the Vespers Ledger, we find our peace. Tonight, we resume our journey with the ancient Israelites. We have seen them cross the parted sea, and we have watched them gather the heavenly bread from the morning frost. But the wilderness is a relentless teacher. Settle into your rest, let your breathing slow, and follow the ancient footsteps into the valley of Rephidim. The ledger tells us that the great multitude moved by stages, guided always by the sovereign presence in the pillar of cloud. They set up their tents in Rephidim, a desolate, rocky plain deep within the Sinai Peninsula. The sun here beat down with an unforgiving intensity, baking the earth until it cracked. And as the people unloaded their burdens and looked around for the wells to draw their daily portion, a terrifying realization swept through the camp. There was no water. The riverbeds were completely dry, filled only with dust and the silent heat of the desert. In the ancient world, water was not merely a comfort, it was the very fragile thread of life itself. The historian Flavius Josephus records that the water they had carried in their leather skins had long since run out. The agonizing grip of thirst began to take hold. Mothers looked helplessly at their crying children, and the elders watched their flocks begin to perish in the blinding heat. Once again, the heavy burden of fear overshadowed the memory of their past deliverances. The people gathered against Moses. Their voices were harsh, cracked with thirst and desperation. They demanded water, accusing him of bringing them out of Egypt simply to let them die in the dust. Matthew Henry, observing this human tragedy, notes that when our immediate needs are unmet, we quickly forget the vast ocean of grace we have already received. Moses, feeling the crushing weight of 1,000,000 terrified souls, did the only thing a true leader can do when human strength is exhausted. He turned away from the anger of the crowd and cried out to the Almighty. He laid his desperation bare, asking what he should do with these people who were almost ready to stone him. The answer from heaven was not a storm of judgment, but a quiet, extraordinary command of grace. God told Moses to walk ahead of the people, to take with him some of the elders of Israel as witnesses, and to carry in his hand the very same wooden staff he had used to strike the waters of the Nile and the Red Sea. The Lord promised to stand before him there on the rock at Horeb. Imagine the scene: Moses, an elderly man carrying the weight of a nation, walking slowly toward a massive, imposing wall of solid granite. The elders followed closely, their faces etched with doubt and exhaustion. Behind them, the vast camp of Israel watched in silence, holding their collective breath. There was no natural spring here. There was only impenetrable stone. But God's ledger is written in the impossible. Moses raised his weathered hand, grasping the ancient wooden staff, and struck the heavy rock. For a fraction of a second, there was only the sharp crack of wood against stone, and then a sound that must have seemed like a symphony to the dying camp. A deep, rumbling fracture echoed through the canyon. The solid granite split open, and from the heart of the dry stone, a powerful, rushing torrent of crystal-clear water burst forth. It did not merely trickle. The ancient scriptures tell us it gushed out, flowing like a river through the dry places. The sound of the rushing water filled the silent valley. The pure, cool streams ran down the rocky slopes, pooling in the basin of the desert floor. The people ran to the waters, falling to their knees, cupping their hands and drinking deeply. The agonizing thirst was quenched. Life, abundant and free, flowed from the most unlikely of places, a hard, unyielding rock. As we close tonight's chapter, let the sound of that desert stream wash over your own weary soul. Perhaps your spirit feels like the valley of Rephidim today, dry, exhausted, and desperately thirsty for peace. Remember that the God who brought water from the solid rock can bring life and refreshment into your most barren seasons. You do not need to carry the heavy waters of your own anxiety. Come to the stream. Drink deeply of his quiet grace, rest in his unwavering provision, and let your soul find its peace in the stillness of this night. Sleep well, and may the living water restore you. Welcome back to the quiet of the evening. Settle into the stillness. Leave the rushing of the modern world behind, and let us open the ledger once more. Tonight, we do not speak of fleeing from armies or crying out in thirst. Tonight, we speak of rest. We travel to the foot of Mount Sinai, where the children of Israel have pitched their tents in the deep, silent shadows of the ancient granite peaks. It is here, in the middle of a barren and unforgiving desert, that God asks them to build a home. The Almighty had brought them out of Egypt, fed them with bread from heaven, and given them water from the solid rock. But now he desired something even more profound. He spoke to Moses, saying, "Let them make me a sanctuary that I may dwell in their midst." Matthew Henry reminds us that God does not need a temple made with hands, but he knows that the human heart needs a visible place of refuge, a sacred space to anchor its faith. Moses came down from the mountain not just with the law, but with a divine blueprint. The call went out through the camp, asking for an offering from everyone whose heart moved them. The response was a beautiful, quiet symphony of devotion. The ancient historian Flavius Josephus describes how the people brought their most precious possessions. They brought gold, silver, and bronze. They brought rare acacia wood, a tree that grows only in the harshest desert conditions, symbolizing endurance and strength. They brought fine linen and spun yarn of blue, purple, and scarlet. The women worked with their hands, and the craftsmen offered their skills. In the center of the dusty, rugged camp, a masterpiece began to rise. It was the Tabernacle, a portable sanctuary of exquisite beauty. Imagine stepping out of the glaring desert sun and walking into the holy place. The noise of the camp fades away. Inside, the walls are made of fragrant acacia wood overlaid with pure gold, reflecting the soft, warm light. The air is thick with the sweet, calming scent of frankincense and myrrh burning on the golden altar of incense. To your left stands the menorah, the golden lampstand hammered from a single piece of pure gold. Its 7 lamps cast a gentle, unwavering glow into the dark quiet of the room. This light was never to go out. It was a perpetual reminder that the divine presence never sleeps and never slumbers. To your right is the table of showbread, holding 12 loaves of fresh bread, representing God's constant provision for his people. And then, separated by a thick, beautifully woven veil of blue, purple, and scarlet, lay the Holy of Holies. This was a place of absolute, unbroken silence. Inside rested only one object, the Ark of the Covenant. It was a sacred chest containing the stone tablets of the law, covered by the mercy seat, where 2 golden cherubim faced each other with wings spread. It was here, above the mercy seat, that the glory of the Lord would descend. When the work was finally finished, Moses inspected the tabernacle and blessed the people. Then a profound and breathtaking event occurred. The cloud that had led them through the desert descended and covered the tent of meeting, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. It was so overwhelming that even Moses could not enter. God had moved in. The Creator of the universe had taken up residence in a tent of fabric and wood, choosing to dwell in the dust with his weary travelers. As you lie down to rest tonight, let the image of that quiet golden sanctuary fill your mind. The world outside may feel like the Sinai desert, harsh, unpredictable, and exhausting, but there is a sanctuary available to your soul. The God who desired to dwell with the wanderers in the ancient wilderness desires to dwell with you tonight. Let his peace be the walls that surround you. Let his grace be the light that guides you in the dark. Rest now in the quiet of the holy place, and may your sleep be deep and undisturbed. The fire has faded to embers, and the desert winds have grown still. We have reached the end of tonight's journey along the ancient paths, from the divided waters of the Red Sea to the heavenly bread upon the morning sand, from the rushing streams of Horeb to the quiet golden sanctuary of the Tabernacle. We have seen that even in the most barren wilderness, the providence of the Almighty never fails. If these chronicles have brought peace to your weary soul tonight, please consider subscribing to the Vespers Ledger. Walk with us again when the shadows lengthen and the world quiets down. May you find your own sanctuary tonight. May your heart be at rest, and may the grace of the Lord watch over your sleep. Good night, and peace be with you.